Welcome back to another episode of Stork Talks.
I'm Zoe.
And I'm Tom.
This week we are covering the sparkling topic of cider with an organization that specializes in this very special beverage, and it is called Cider Cider. Now, the first apple presses were in fact reworked olive presses, and they were used by the ancient Romans. The very first apples come from Kazakhstan, which is also the site of the original Garden of Eden.
And speaking on the topic of the Garden of Eden, the apple is well known for being the forbidden fruit. And that raises the question whether any beverages created from this magical fruit should also be considered a forbidden drink. And that's what we're exploring today.
Well, perhaps, Tom, but did you know that there are over 10,000 varieties of apples? So as a result, cider is found on menus across the globe, all the way from India and Canada to Australia and back to Finland and Germany and France. And of course, for the wine lovers among us, heritage cider is made with cider-specific apples. So in that way, it is like wine. The apples matter.
That's right, Zoe. And to really explore this beverages and the possibilities it has for beating out the all-time Dutch favorite of het biertje, as they say, we are talking to Wouter Bijl, the founder and owner of Cider Cider. Welcome, Wouter. Thank you for joining us.
Sure, no problem. I always love to talk about ciders and drink a few as well, obviously. But let's first talk about it. It's still early, so...
Talking first. Okay, so perhaps, Wouter, that we can start just with a simple question. What for you, why do you think cider is so popular? What makes it so popular for you? What inspired you to start this initiative? And do you think it will ever replace beer here in the Netherlands?
Well, that's a very good question. I actually started with importing cider because it wasn't very popular. And I still think there's like a world to win. But the thing is with cider that keeps it interesting for me as well. I started in 2009, so it's been a few years already. But there is so much variation in taste, in like whether it's sparkling or not. It can be sweet, it can be dry, it can be funky, like barnyard funky that you smell and you think, okay, what's this? But it can be awesome in that sense, and it can be really clear and clean like a wine, and it can be so many things. And that's actually the knowledge is very. I mean, people just don't know that much about it, but it is a very wide category that makes it really sort of hard to understand, and I think that makes it underestimated actually. And we're trying really hard with the assortment that we have. We try to make that really wide, and we're also working on a new bar where people can actually come in and tasting stuff, and we do a lot of tastings if we're allowed to, at least. So at the moment we don't, but we really try to teach people about what cider is and how wide it is and what it can be. But will it ever replace the beer? Would be nice, but I rather see it as sort of an extra. It's just an extra thing. You have beer, you have wine, you have ciders. So for me, it doesn't really replace anything, or shouldn't really replace anything anyway. But it's just something like an extra option with just very interesting flavor. And there are some reasons for people that, for instance, can't handle beer because of the gluten. You know, that for them cider can be very interesting because it's more or less the same alcohol percentage, so you can drink along with your friends. So in that sense, it can be very interesting, and well, just for the taste and the sheer difference, it can be really interesting to.
Indeed, I think apples are gluten-free, are they not?
They are, yes.
Maybe one quick question before we move on, Wouter. You said, well, you started with importing, but where did your relationship with cider start? Like,
Well, I really like it myself. Obviously, that's why. Otherwise, you don't start with it, I guess. But we used to go to France on holidays, and mainly normally in Brittany. And you can get cider on every corner of the street there from like little farm shops. So I always had good memories. And then if I came back home, there was never any decent cider available, or it was really cheap and yeah, just terrible, or maybe some really expensive bottles. And then I thought, well, let's try to import myself. And from there on, sort of started out as a hobby. Obviously, I didn't think of it like that then. I thought it was really serious, but in the end, it was really more a hobby.
hmm.
But it's grown out to be a very nice company. And I mean, even then, I was only familiar with the French ciders. And after that, I discovered the rest of the world. And I'm quite sure that I have only tasted like a tiny bit of what is available and what can be done with ciders. So there's still, for me, even for me, there's still so much to discover. So that makes it, well, it makes it interesting and keeps it interesting as well.
I think that's a good sign. And
it is, yeah.
And I think what is exciting, you touched upon it earlier when you said, well, there's this French market where you can get it on every corner shop, and here in the Netherlands, like you said, it's not as well known. We saw examples of Heineken, who had, for example, launched a few cider type brands, for example, Jill's in 2007, sort of to test the waters to see if the Dutch market is ready for more ciders to pop up. Do you think that the Dutch market is now ready for the large scale import and consumption of cider?
Well, I think it's getting ready. It's getting better every year. We see it growing, but I don't expect any big booms like you had with gin or with prosecco, that you have like in 1 or 2 years you have a very steep line up of sales. I don't really expect that. I think it's, I mean, obviously when I started, I thought that. I was hoping probably that would happen. But because like cider is quite complex for a lot of people, and it's really hard if you order a cider, it's because people have very little knowledge of it. They hardly, they have a hard time judging what they might get. So it will be really difficult to sort of like scale up like enormously. I mean, one the production isn't there, so it does make sense to make it a very steep line. And the other thing is, I think like organic growth and just step by step makes more sense for a product like that. And so I decided that I'm happy with just the small steps, and just as long as there's progression, then. But you see it even with Heineken. I mean, they put millions and millions in it, and they haven't really gotten it any further than. Obviously, they're selling more than I am. Don't get me wrong, but even they haven't sort of, with all the millions that they put in and all the products they put on the market and got off again. You know, even they didn't sort of break it into the market. I mean, it's still. You have to look for it, and sometimes it's at the beer section, sometimes it's at the wine section. You know, it's still a bit of, it should have its own sort of shelf in the supermarket. I think that is when we can say cider is established.
Has arrived.
Yeah.
Has arrived, yeah. But unfortunately, all the Heineken stuff is not really worth it.
Well, yeah.
It goes more to hard seltzers for me. It's like an apple seltzer. Sorry. Yeah,
why has Heineken, as you say, they've invested millions, but why is it that they haven't managed to find, a decent sort of widely drinkable cider to get behind? I mean, is it that difficult?
Well, I think the market is not used to cider, so you have to teach people about cider. I think they put a lot of effort in that. They actually had like general commercials, not even putting out like a real brand. But general commercial about what cider is, and obviously they had a whole lovely story about apples being crushed and fermented, and obviously their cider is not made like that. I mean, what they make is more like an apple hard seltzer. So that's what they make, in my opinion. And obviously they do own Strongbow as well, which in the right recipe can be an okay cider. not my
Yeah.
favorite, but it can be
No.
quite sort of well, pure, just like fermented
Drinkable.
juice. Yeah, drinkable.
So
That's the right word. So it can be that, but it's I think they're too margin driven. And in that sense, they just haven't managed to find a cider where, they just wanted to take it on from the easy side, so the sweet sort of. And I think that market, I don't know whether that market is really growing or people grow out of that. Um, so yeah, I think is the problem why they haven't got it going or haven't got a proper quality is really because of the margins.
Well, one quick question that I want to ask you, because we've heard a number of times you mentioning, well, people don't have enough knowledge, they don't know enough about ciders. So what specific knowledge is it that people are missing? Is it like, what is it about ciders that we don't know that would actually encourage us to drink it more?
Well, there are a lot of answers possible to to your question. I think like it's just general knowing the flavors, knowing the kind of flavors that it come in. If you are used to like the sweet ciders and you order a cider in a bar and you don't know the brand, so you just think, hey, I want a cider, let's get it, and it turns out to be like a very funky dry cider, then you will be disappointed. And the same the other way, if you want to have something dry and you order something, a cider, and it's really terribly sort of sweet, then you are, so people, there are not that many known brands yet that people can sort of trust and they know what they're getting. Like every bar has like a Pilsner, they're sort of defining, they're easygoing, everybody sort of likes that kind of beer. And then they have like rows and rows of like specialty beers if you want something special.
Yeah.
And that's with cider. You actually need that a good quality, but really a cider that everybody sort of can enjoy. So not too dry, not too sweet, not too bitter, not too acidic. Something sort of in the middle.
A bit like wine in that sense. Like everybody has like knows somewhat about the grapes. They have like a house wine that is easily drinkable, and then there's special varieties if you want to taste. And there you need the advice maybe from an
But
expert
people
to
know
help guide you.
more
Yeah,
about wines, or at least
exactly.
think they know more about wines than they know about cider. But it's also, if you see, wines, they always have, like you say, they have the house wines and they have a few other wines. And with cider, they tend to have just one or two.
Yeah.
Because it is sort of an extra. They like it and they sell it, but it is an extra. So if you don't have that range, then if somebody, or if you just have one cider and that's not the cider you like, you're not going to drink cider, or you might be disappointed in cider. And if you don't know that there's way more out there. So it is a thing of ask and demand, or is it
Yeah.
ask and
Supply and demand, or
supply and demand? It is. Yeah.
But now you've mentioned earlier, Wouter, that indeed, cider is normally we think of cider and apples, but of course you also get cider made from pears, and you mentioned to us that in fact in the Netherlands they grow more pears than apples. Are there, well, firstly, maybe do you think perhaps pear cider might take off here rather than the apple variety, and also are there other fruits that might be utilized for future cider that might become popular here in the Netherlands, do you think?
Well, it depends a bit on what your definition of cider is, obviously, what you can put in a cider.
Yeah.
We tend to see, like, well, you have obviously the apple cider, just pure apple. So the hardcore cider fanatics think that is cider. And then most of the time for pear cider, there's another name. Like you have poiré in French and like perry in the UK, or pear cider if you use common pears for it instead of perry pears. So there's usually another term for it, but I think those are the two main categories of fruit. We see a lot of additions of other fruits being added, but then like we, for instance, have a cider made with passion fruit and Madame Jeanette pepper. Really cool combination, but there's only, I think, like 10% passion fruit in there. That's more than enough to sort of make that, or maybe 1%. Actually, don't know.
Wow.
just one. I'm looking to the left to my colleague.
So when do they become cocktails? So when is it cider, and when do they sort of transition into like
what
beverages?
that's a really good question. What is a cider precisely? And there are people that not everywhere it's really put into the law. For instance, like wine is really clear. You can only add grapes to it. It should be grapes. Otherwise, it's like a food wine. But on the other hand, you can add a lot of sort of other nasty stuff and taste flavor components and so. So I think it's a bit cheating, but anyway. But with the cider, you can. It is a very free category, except for like in France that there needs to have like 100% fruit in there. But you can add a lot of, and I think for me that really makes the category more interesting, even more complex though, I admit that as well. So it might not be getting it easier, but you can do all the crazy things that you do with like the craft beers, for instance, so adding other ingredients or barrel aging, or you can do so many other things. So for me, that makes it really like an interesting drink, and you can have so many variables. And
so maybe that's a good question.
More.
Which path would you like to go down to? Like the explorative path with all these strange recipes, or trying to like the common route for the people, or maybe both at the same time?
Well, the thing is, obviously, I like it all. That is the big issue. Well, we're actually making cider since a few years now ourselves. So we ramped up production last year. So we're not huge yet, or not, but we do some nice volume, and we have sort of two lines. So one is more sort of the adding ingredients, like more crafty style of cider, like that with the Madame Jeanette and the passion fruit, and we also have a hop cider, for instance. And the other ranges that we're having that we actually tend to like more is the natural style, so totally natural fermented, in the style of the natural wine. So no addition of sulfites, no addition of yeast. So just like let nature do its work. And that's why the orchard in the background actually comes into play. That you need specific apple varieties, preferably. Like most of the older varieties are quite well suited because they have a bit more tannins, they have a bit more body. So we like in autumn we're picking some old orchards to get that fruit, but it's hard to get big volumes. But we enjoy sort of having the whole natural process and just trying to make that work.
Sorry.
No problem.
I was going to say, so let's latch onto that a little bit, because speaking about processes, one of the processes we saw on your website as well is that you do sort of ice cider, and it's a different fermentation process. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, but perhaps you first need to very quickly explain what the normal process of cider looks like before sort of diving into this special one.
Yeah, if you just make sort of a plain, not too crazy cider, then it's actually very much like wine. So you get the apples, grate them, or crush them, press them, and then the juice you can have fermented. You can have it. You can add yeast. You can have a natural fermentation by the yeast that is available just everywhere around us. And then after a while, there's obviously time to bottle. You can bottle it with, like for instance, sugar to get on it to get your sparkle. But you can also pressurize it in the tank and then bottle it. Or we have done a few, like a champagne style method. So where we degorge, so you get the sediment out and then you have the bubble. So there are a lot of ways to make it, but it is just mainly getting the fruit, pressing it and fermenting that juice and then bottling it. And you can do that like in a million different sort of variations. And there's a lot like in the time as well. So that is basically the normal process. And if you do an ice cider, that's very interesting. It's very sort of unknown, even more unknown than normal cider. You get the fruits. You either freeze the fruit or the juice. You can do both. And what you get then, if you press that, then you get a very concentrated cider or apple juice. and it has very little nutrients. So the fermentation is really slow. So you let that ferment, and then you get a very nice, intense, delicate cider that you can use mainly. It's quite sweet still, so it's mainly used for desserts and really special occasions. It's a really cool
Is
thing, but
it,
it's really specific.
does it have a higher alcohol content as a result, or not
It does.
necessarily?
Yeah, you have more sugar or you have more concentration of sugar, because what you do actually with the freezing is you get part of the water out. So you don't get the flavor out, but you
Yeah.
get part of the water out. So you just get a
Mm.
concentration of flavor and sugar, obviously. So they usually end up 10, 11% most of the time. And a regular cider is around 5, well, depending on where it comes from, obviously.
Wow.
So there's quite
Gosh. Okay. I mean, yes, so we've started on this, but I feel like there's probably a lot more. So maybe for our listeners, it would just be interesting if you could tell us a little bit about some of your favorite up and coming ciders, Wouter, maybe particular regions, either here in the Netherlands or further abroad, that are especially promising, perhaps, in terms of cider and cider making.
Yeah, well, there are a few things that are going on. There are quite a lot of things actually going on. Like America has been booming the last couple of like 10 years. They've been ahead with the whole craft beer market, obviously.
Mm.
And after craft beer market, they discovered cider again, or rediscovered cider. Cider was like the choice of like the pilgrims in the old days, because it was easier. You didn't have to do too much for an
Yeah.
apple tree. Just plant it and then come to harvest it every year, and that was it. And after prohibition, they cut down all the trees and put grain in. So then they had more grain to make beers.
Wow.
So that's why then they got onto the beers. But they totally
Oh.
rediscovered that. So that's really cool. But so that's been really interesting. They do a lot of the crafty stuff. So adding flavors, coming up with crazy styles and sometimes really crazy ciders as well, crazy flavors. But there are some really good examples. What I liked recently, because like France was my sort of country that sort of made me aware of cider. So I've always been a big fan of them, but they were always lagging behind. And recently, you see a lot more young people coming into the trade and then starting it up and then having a different mindset. They still produce very much traditionally, but they look more at barrel aging and maybe adding like hops. But they're using the good fruit that their like ancestors planted, because like the old trees, like the old high stem trees, you sort of plant for the next generation. It takes at least 10 years to get a decent harvest out of them. And even for the pear trees, it can take like 25 years to get a good harvest. So, you don't really plant that to get sort of crop next year. So like they have a really good and awesome fruit. And if you treat it in an interesting way and maybe do a champagne style, and there are a lot of cool things coming of that. Spain is developing very much as well. So new modern styles coming from that, and the traditional ones are really good as well. They're a bit more acidic, but they go very well if you either have really nice weather like it is now, or if you have some more fatty food. That is awesome. So it breaks the acidity, breaks the fattiness. With the acidity.
Yeah, I've had I think some good ciders from, is it Asturias in Spain?
Mainly
There's some very
Asturias,
nice
but
ones.
also the Basque Country and a bit in Galicia. So the northern part, top northern part of Spain, that is actually really green instead of really hot and scorchy, like the south. But they grow apples there, and it's an amazing place, and their culture is really well established around cider. Really cool. But you see more modern things coming up. Like we now had like a cider vermouth, for instance, but also like champagne style methods. And one of our producers even don't have it in yet, but they came out with an alcohol-free one. So there's a lot of things happening, and I'm really curious what else comes out of that.
There's a lot of cider knowledge waiting for us. one of my
Yeah,
what
yeah. There are way more interesting countries to tell you about, but it's just
but that's
we
why
don't
you
have
do the
so many
tastings,
days.
right? That's why you do the
Yeah, yeah.
tastings.
That's
You
what we
can tell
do.
Absolutely.
people about that.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah, yeah.
one of my favorite sort of takeaways from this was as well, as you said, well, there's a like the benefit of drinking cider is also there's a climate benefit, because you said, well, in America they cut down all the trees to make room for like the hop. In that sense, like drinking cider has a very positive climate impact, because we have to plant trees like apple trees and apple orchards to actually be able to well, enjoy the
To have,
cider, the boom in
yeah.
cider that we're gonna see.
Really, it really can help cool down the earth to plant a bit more trees. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Less wine, less beer, and more cider. Yeah, sure.
So maybe a final question to you, Wouter, is you said, well, it's difficult for a lot of people to find the ciders, or if they are interested, where they can find the good ones, and especially for the international community in The Hague, maybe what would you recommend? Where can they find the ciders if they're looking for them?
Well, obviously, come to visit us. I mean,
Naturally.
naturally, we're an importer, but we also have a web shop, and we do like we do normally. We do tastings, and we make our own ciders. But there are more importers as well. You know, we're quite friendly in the business, so we have to help each other out. So if you just look on, search for cider, and online, Google's your best friend. And then you'll find, and then skip all the terrible Heineken stuff, then you'll find a few nice importers that do really cool stuff, and they get really good stuff. I don't know that many shops in The Hague selling it at the moment. We don't really sell to The Hague that much. But there are probably some shops, like most of the expat shops tend to have some cider, obviously. But if you really want to have more and discover more and more countries, then most of the time one of the cider importers is a good place to start.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. Would you recommend trying it yourself at home?
Well, I think no. What I should do is go to a specialist, and then let them advise you on, tell them what you like, what kind of style, and then let them give you an advice of what ciders might be suitable for you. It's actually funny. We do a lot, obviously, on the website. We have descriptions, but we hardly ever get a call from somebody who's on the website and asking about advice, which I think they should do a bit more. But that's why we have a small shop here on Fridays and Saturdays. There you can just have a look around and can advise stuff. And I think that's the best place to start. And then I always tell people, please remember what you had and what you thought of it. And then if you come back next time, or give a call if you want to order online, we can just help you out with saying, oh, if you like that, then you might like that as well. So we can actually help people sort of get through get to discover the ciders and what they can.
A regular appointment with the cider consultant. That's
just put it on your agenda monthly.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I think particularly now, as we coming out of Corona, I'm sure, there'll be more opportunities, as you say, for people to visit perhaps your shop or to try a tasting. And I do think that there's no replacement for actually tasting the cider.
No, I totally agree. It's really hard. We used to have a shop with a bar attached to it, so that was really easy. So it was open, and I think that the value of that is really, so big. So we're now looking into opening a new cider bar. It won't have a shop attached, but then you still can at least taste a bit more ciders and get to know more ciders. And we'll do tasting flights there as well, so that will be very interesting for people to get to know a bit more about cider and the background.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, time flies. As always, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Wouter, on Stork Talks. I think we all feel, as always, that there's a lot more that we can learn about cider. Of course, naturally. But for our listeners, if you're now curious about cider, the Cider Cider website is very straightforward, www.cidercider.nl. So that might be your first stop.
Yeah. Thank you, Wouter, so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, and like I said, there's tons more to tell. So if you ever want to do a second podcast, you'll have my number. So don't
That's always
hesitate.
good. It's always good to
Or,
have the number of someone who sells cider. That's
yeah.
a
I
big plus.
completely
Or
agree.
come over and get some drinks. That might be good as well. So maybe we can do it next time. We can do it live and then pop
That
some
would be
bottles
fun.
and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I
would be
feel
fun.
that it's not just the cider brewing, but the ideas here as well. That's a good sign.
Cider is quite helping with that to remain to keep creative. So cool.
I think we might just take you up on that. And in the meantime, we will say thank you to everyone for tuning in to another episode. Be sure to check out previous episodes on our Anchor, and you can always follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and you can always watch the full unedited interviews with Wouter and previous guests that we had on our YouTube channel called Stork Talks. Thank you for stalking with us again this week, and we look forward to welcoming you back in the next.